Okay, let's dive into this. Out on the Giza Plateau, you've got the last surviving wonder of the ancient world, the Great Pyramid. It's a monument so huge, so unbelievably perfect, you could almost believe it wasn't built by human hands. But it was. It was built for one man, a pharaoh, who, it turns out, is one of history's greatest mysteries.
And this right here perfectly captures the paradox we're digging into. On one side, you have his monument. We're talking 2.3 million stone blocks, weighing 6 million tons. For almost 4,000 years, this was the tallest thing on the entire planet. And on the other side, the man himself, Pharaoh Khufu. We have exactly one undisputed statue of him, and it's small enough to fit in the palm of your hand. So how on earth can the man behind the mountain be such a complete ghost in his own story?
And that question just leads to an even bigger one. The little we do hear about Khufu is all over the place, just wildly contradictory. So who was he really? Was he a cruel tyrant who literally enslaved his people? A heretic who turned his back on the gods? Or was he just a powerful king, at the absolute peak of his civilization's power?
For more than 2,000 years, the most famous version of the story came from the Greek historian Herodotus. Now, he was writing centuries after Khufu was even alive, and he painted this really grim picture. A total megalomaniac who shut down the temples, banned sacrifices, and forced his entire population into slave labor. Herodotus even spread this story that Khufu prostituted his own daughter to help pay for it all. For a very long time, that was the story that stuck.
But see, Herodotus wasn't the only one talking. There was an Egyptian priest named Manetho who wrote much, much closer to Khufu's time, and he tells a totally different story. As you can see here, he gives us a much more complicated guy, an inquisitive ruler who, maybe he despised the gods for a while, but then he supposedly repented and wrote a whole sacred book. So, which is it? A cruel egomaniac or a spiritual ruler on some quest for hidden knowledge? To get anywhere close to an answer, we've got to move past these conflicting stories and just look at the tangible clues, the stuff that has actually survived for 4,600 years. And the key word here is few. There's hardly anything.
And this is it. Seriously, the only complete three-dimensional portrait of the man who built the world's largest pyramid. It's a tiny little ivory figurine, just a few centimeters high, that was found completely by chance back in 1903. For a king who built on such a mind-boggling scale, the lack of official statues and images is it's deafening. It's almost as if somebody, somewhere, wanted him to be erased.
Another huge piece of the puzzle is something called the Westcar Papyrus. Now, it's basically a collection of stories written down long after he died, but it shows a completely different Khufu. He's not a tyrant in these tales. He's this intellectually curious king who's fascinated by magic and magicians. He summons this one guy, Jiti, not just for a show, but because he thinks Jiti knows where to find the secret chambers of the god Thoth. This paints a picture of a ruler who's obsessed with esoteric, hidden knowledge, not just his own glory.
Then, in 2013, a totally stunning discovery: the diary of a man named Mir. This guy was basically a mid-level manager working on the pyramid, and his logbook doesn't talk about cruelty or magic or gods. It talks about logistics. It lays out the daily grind of quarrying limestone at Tura and then shipping it by boat to the Giza site, which they called Akhet Khufu, the horizon of Khufu. It's an incredible, real-time glimpse into a highly organized, state-run machine.
So, this brings us to the ultimate question. Even if we don't really know the man, can we at least figure out how he pulled off the impossible? I mean, for centuries, people just assumed it was all about brute force. But modern forensic architecture is starting to reveal a solution that is just stunningly elegant.
The classic theory you see in all the textbooks is that they used one single massive ramp on the outside. But here's the problem. That ramp would have needed more stone than the pyramid itself, and it would have been incredibly unstable. So, a French architect named Jean-Pierre Houdin came along with a revolutionary idea. What if they built the majority of the pyramid from the inside?
Houdin's theory is just brilliant in how simple it is. As you can see, it works in stages. First, they use a short, external ramp to build up the massive base. Then comes the real genius move. They build a corkscrew ramp inside the pyramid's outer edge to haul the blocks the rest of the way up. And get this, even the famous Grand Gallery had a job. It was probably part of a huge counterweight system to lift those massive granite beams. Finally, they just took apart the outer ramp and used its stones to finish the very top, leaving almost no trace of how they did it.
And this isn't just some wild theory.
There's actually compelling evidence. Way back in 1986, a team doing scans found a spiral-shaped area of lower density inside the pyramid, exactly where this internal ramp would have been. There's even an unexplored notch high up on one corner, right where a turn in the ramp would need an opening. And we even know the Egyptians used this technique because a similar ramp was found in a nearby temple. They had the tech.
So, we may have finally cracked the code on how the pyramid was built, but that just brings us right back to the man himself. Does figuring out the construction really help us understand the king?
I mean, just look at the logistics here. Most of the pyramid was local limestone, sure. The beautiful white casing stones were floated in from Tuwara, but the huge granite beams for the king's chamber, they were quarried in Aswan and shipped over 850 kilometers up the Nile. This wasn't the work of some simple tyrant. This was a national project that required absolute administrative genius.
And what about the workers? Remember Herodotus' claim of 100,000 miserable slaves? Well, modern archaeology tells a completely different story. Excavations of the nearby workers' village show these were skilled, paid laborers. They were well-fed, getting daily rations of meat, bread, and beer. In fact, their protein intake was higher than the average Egyptians. These were respected artisans, not slaves.
So, at the end of the day, the monument really does speak for itself. It's an undeniable testament to a leader with incredible vision, incredible power, and incredible organizational skill. It tells us what Khufu did, but it tells us almost nothing about who he was. The man who moved a mountain is still a shadow, a ghost at the very heart of his own masterpiece.
The pyramid is a perfect structure, but it guards a deeply imperfect history. It's outlasted empires, religions, entire civilizations, and it seems like it's destined to outlast the memory of the very man it was built to immortalize, leaving us with a question that just might echo for another 4,600 years.